Thank you. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to end about 10 minutes early because I have an 8 o'clock responsibility that I have to meet. So we'll have about 50 minutes to do tonight. And if I need to, I'll make it up next week, but I think we'll be okay. So this unit is under the faith category. And just as a brief introduction, there is no word in biblical Hebrew for religion. There's no word for biblical Hebrew. In modern Hebrew, they take a word from the Bible that meant law, a term for law, L-A-W, it's dot, and they make that, they've used that for religion. But biblically, it was a part of the life of the Hebrews. The religion was part of their life, and they didn't see it as a separation between government, military, everything was all united and integrated. So they didn't need a separate word for it. There were a number of things like that they didn't really have separate words for. They were all part of the whole, of the fabric of society. They did have a word that we today associate with faith, but they used it a little bit differently, and that word is Emunah, and it's the same letters, Aleph, Mem, Nun, as Amen, right? Amen. It means, so Emunah is that which you can say Amen to. And Amen means, I believe that, I hold that, I agree 100% with that, right? So that becomes in modern Hebrew a word for faith. It really, we think in the Bible, it was much more loyalty. Emunah really was loyalty, because what I'm saying is I'm with you, right? I'm not talking about, when I say amen, I'm not telling you that I specifically agree with what you just said. I'm saying I'm with you. I generally am, I'm with you. And that means I am loyal to you. So if you hold that, I'm with you, right? And that is different than the way we use faith. Now, part of this is because there is a concept that most historians and theologians agree to. Hello, Michael, welcome. And that concept is that there were no atheists before basically the Renaissance. That is, in the biblical world, in the early medieval world, in the intertestamental world, there were no atheists. Everyone held, virtually everyone in the world held that there was a higher power, God, gods, two gods, whatever their belief was, no one denied that there was a greater power. Some held that it was the earth itself or nature itself, but no one denied the idea of an overriding power in the world or powers in the world. And that means that there was no real use for the notion of having faith. Everybody had faith in something, in some being or some entity. In the modern world, obviously, there are differences. And within Judaism, because as we've talked about in the past, we are not a dogma-oriented religion. We don't have a set dogma, a set of beliefs that everyone must adhere to, right? When someone converts to Judaism, even among the Orthodox, they don't adhere to a set, they don't check off a set of beliefs. What they check off within Orthodoxy is a set of actions. Do you keep Shabbat? Do you keep the holidays in a traditional way? Do you keep kosher in a traditional way? Right? That's even among the Orthodox. Those are the things, the boxes they need to check. They don't have to describe their faith in God. They don't specifically have to describe the way they view the afterlife. So since we don't really have a set group of beliefs that everyone must adhere to, therefore we live in a world of opinion when we're dealing with faith. But the truth is, Judaism is a tradition of opinion, right? And that's what we're going to look at briefly today. We're going to go back. This is an assumption that we all made, that there's a majority opinion, a minority opinion, that people have a right to question and do question. Jews question all the time. We know that. You question all the time, right? Your rabbis are aware of that. Your teachers are aware of that. You are trained from early on to ask questions, right? So that being the case, I want to look at a couple of texts that actually describe this notion from a traditional Jewish point of view. So Jeff is going to guide us through. If you would please bring up that first text, Jeff. Now, the rabbis, nice and big, that's good. Let's get to the English, please, Jeff, because I can handle the Hebrew, but I don't know who else wants to do that. Here we are. All right, so this is from a traditional midrash. Here is this statement. So who would like to read it? Bobby has her hand raised. So Bobby, unmute and go for it.
Yes. Would help if I unmute. Yeah. Excuse me. Elijah said, once as I was walking along the road, a man accosted me. He came at me aggressively with a sort of argument that leads to heresy. It turned out that the man had scripture, but no Mishnah. He asserted, scripture was given to us from Mount Sinai, but not Mishnah. I replied, my son, were not both scripture and Mishnah given by the Almighty? Does the fact that they are different from each other mean that both cannot have been given by God? They offered a parable to elucidate this point. What is this like? Like a mortal king who had two servants, both of whom he loved completely. To one he gave a measure of wheat, and to the other he gave a measure of wheat. To one a bundle of flax, and to the other a bundle of flax. What did the clever one of the two do? He took the flax and wove it into a cloth. He took the wheat and made it into fine flour by sifting the grain and grinding it. Then he kneaded the dough and baked it, set the loaf of bread on the table, spread the cloth over the bread, and left it to await the coming of the king. But the foolish one of the two did not do anything at all.
Okay. So what is the parable teaching in the area of the Mishnah and the Torah? So the man that he meets, right, says, I believe in Torah. I accept Torah because it's written in the Torah how it was given. Mishnah, it's not from God. And then he gives this parable. So what is the parable saying about the nature of our tradition?
There's no set rule.
Well, but how do we arrive at that rule? At what we do or don't do or believe or not believe, according to the parable?
We're given the basics, but having the basics really isn't valuable unless you put them to use.
Okay, what are the person, that's good. What is the person given? What are the two people given?
A brain.
No. What in the parable, what were the two people given?
Wheat and flax.
Flax and
Wheat.
and wheat.
Okay. Have you ever eaten wheat off the stalk?
No,
It's basically inedible. And I believe it's undigestible for most people. And flax, you know, what do you do with flax? You can't eat it. You can't just use it as it is by and large.
Make cloth.
actually, you
No.
can grind it. I use it every day.
And do what with it? Right.
Pardon?
So what does he say you do with wheat?
He ground it and made it into flour to make it usable as a food.
Right. But he did
He
more than
used
just,
he used his brain.
well, I understand that, but we'll get to the brain. But what the parable is dealing with is that the wheat itself, he grinds it, he sifts it, he crushes it, he then makes it into dough, then he bakes it. There are all these stages, right, to take the essence and turn it into bread. And what he's saying is, right, that's what Mishnah is. That's what Jewish tradition is. If you just take the Torah by itself, it's undigestible. It's unusable. You can't just take that essential ingredient. You've got to transform it into something usable, something that benefits us. And that's what the Mishnah and Talmud is. But the Mishnah and Talmud beats it, crushes it, sifts it, bakes it, right? It doesn't just take it as it's given and translate it. It goes through all kinds of things in order to make it applicable to our lives. That's true for the flax as well, to make it into clothes. And the foolish person, who's the guy who's saying, I don't need to do that, is basically saying, you know, I'm fine with the wheat and the flax. I don't need bread and I don't need clothes. I'll just live with the raw elements. And that's foolish. From a Jewish standpoint, it's foolish to just look at the text. Now, I'm saying this, and we're looking at this partly because actually we have right in front of us in our society and in our world, a tradition that grew out of the idea that each person can look at the raw text and decide for themselves what it says. That's what Protestantism said to Catholicism. You understand, the Protestant Reformation was that each Christian can read the text, which under Catholicism, they said you couldn't. You've got to sift it through the priesthood. But the Protestants said, no, give everybody a Bible. Read the Bible. It's right there. You can all take it. It's revealed right there. You don't need a middle person to interpret it for you. That was the Protestant Reformation. It was literalists. It was saying it literally tells you exactly what you need. Judaism is anti-literalist. We are like what this parable says. We don't believe that the Torah by itself gives us all the truth. It hints at it. It helps us understand it, but we need to crush it, beat it, examine it, change it, and apply it into our lives and ingest it. Right? Now, I'm giving you, this is a traditional text, and it's describing the traditional process. And I want us to understand, this is not just for Reformed Jews, right? This is for all Jews. This is our tradition. And no matter how much an Orthodox person says, we don't change. Change is exactly what we do, but we disagree on the process for change. An Orthodox rabbi would say, none of you have the right, none of us have the right to do that baking. We don't have the tools to do the baking. Only the knowledgeable rabbis who have immersed their lives in Torah, in the tradition, only they can make that bread, and then you can ingest it. But we don't have that right. Reform says no, each of us can do that if we understand and sift it through our tradition and use our tradition to help us. We can create that bread. But my bread might be seedless rye, and yours might be challah with raisins. It still is tasty and it works for me, but I don't need to be told that I have to have seeded rye or pumpernickel or a certain kind of everything bagel. I can decide for me, that's what Reform says, by studying and understanding, because I can't just bake a bagel. I can't just make a bagel. I know we don't bake it, we boil it. I'm not that ignorant about baking, but I need a recipe. I need something. Somebody's got to help me to try and figure out what ingredients work and how they work. So if I don't listen to other bakers who have gone through the process of understanding how wheat becomes flour, how flour reacts, how it rises, what is yeast, if I don't go through some of that with a recipe, and then I can add my own, right? I can decide to put chocolate chips in my rye bread if I want. I know we put chocolate chips in other things, we can do it. I could put jalapeno peppers in my challah if I want to, though even if I don't have that recipe. But to make the challah, I've got to learn in order to do that, right? And that is the metaphor for how we as Jews understand faith. And in fact, it's how we understand our tradition, all of it. That we cannot just take raw material and read it on the surface. We need the wisdom of others in order to help us learn and develop the skills in order to make a decision about the truth of the text for us. Because there is no one truth in every text. There are a number of truths. And the proof of that, of course, is that our tradition always gives many opinions on many issues. So Jeff, if you would, let's go to the second text. Are there any comments on that? Anybody want to comment on that before we move on? All right, we're going to go to the Talmud, Menachot.
Rabbi, can I ask?
Sure.
So thank you. So I get the parable and what you said is very meaningful, but I'm having a little bit of a hard time with the word faith and connecting that to the learning and the understanding of the meaning of Torah and what we're supposed to learn from Torah and Mishnah or from our own teachings and applicability. The word faith has a lot sort of packed into it in my feeble mind. And maybe that's coming and I shouldn't be so anxious, but I was having a little bit of a hard time connecting what you said to the word faith.
Okay, so we talked a lot about bread and wheat. We didn't talk a lot about flax and clothes, right? So they are two different things and they're two different processes to get there, but they both involve steps that are necessarily along the way. Now, from a Jewish standpoint, that would mean the Torah was given, according to the Torah, it was given by God, right? Says it over and over. God said this, God ordered this, God dictated this, right? We have it throughout there. God is an assumption in the Torah. God is not, there's no set of criteria that God has to follow, nor are there set descriptions for God that we have to follow. But God is an assumption. But and it doesn't say you have to believe in God. I know you understand that that is not considered a mitzvah. Maimonides and Nachmanides debate about this issue. But there is no consensus that faith in God, belief in God, is a mitzvah. Loving God is a mitzvah. Okay, so what does it mean to love God? Well, how do I learn what it is to love God? I learn it partly by my own life experience of love. If I love my mother, my father, I have some understanding of love. If I love baseball, I have another understanding of love. If I love my friend, I have another understanding of love. If I love to eat sushi, I have another they're all love, but they're different aspects. But how can I arrive at loving God? Well, one of the ways Judaism would say is, let's see what others in our tradition have written about this, and perhaps they can help me and guide me on my journey, because they have experienced this and they are bright, and we have a whole tradition of this. And from the beginning, that's what we've been, is on a journey to try and understand what others have thought, and therefore come to our own understanding. Faith is just another aspect of the tradition that we call the Jewish people, or Judaism, or the Jewish civilization, as Kaplan would say. It's one part of it, and it affects everything else. If I choose to deny faith in a higher being, if I say, yes, I believe in lots of things, but I don't believe in a higher being, it doesn't necessarily affect whether I keep kosher or not. But I have to answer why I keep kosher to myself in a different way. I certainly can't answer it because God has commanded it. And I can't answer it because God has said it's better for me. I have none of those answers. So I have to find another way to embrace kashrut if I do. It does affect everything I do as a Jew. If I keep Shabbat, I have the same issue. If I don't keep Shabbat, well, I could ignore it, but then I'm ignoring one of the main categories of our tradition. I have a right to do that, but we would say, as Reformed Jews, that's not being a serious Jew. Being a serious Jew is looking at it, our tradition, and trying to arrive at what it is that I need to do. I don't know if that helps, but faith is part of the category that underlies the Bible, and therefore the Bible underlies almost everything we do, and so it does affect it. But remember, I don't know if you heard the beginning, Michael. Faith, the word faith doesn't exist in the Bible.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So it is something that we've learned to embrace out of our experience with other religions and the other parts of the world. And we now accept it as a category. That's partly why we separate it. And now we have the language of faith. But for instance, when I've had conversions candidates who grew up in the former Soviet Union, they have no language of faith. They don't know what that language is. There's no way to talk to them about it without teaching them basic vocabulary and concepts, because they never learned it in their culture, and it's not part of their kishkas. They understand loyalty, and emunah, that word that we use for faith, as I said, biblically probably meant loyalty. They understand loyalty because that's what they've been taught: loyalty to the state, loyalty to communism, loyalty to the leadership, loyalty to the ideology. They understand that. Does that help, Michael?
I think so. It also I think there's a necessary implication that, and I'm just thinking about the Shema, and we're supposed to love God with all our heart, all our soul, all our might, right?
Right.
So at some level, it feels like you have to have faith that there is a God in order to find meaning in that particular commandment, even though I guess at one point I heard there were 80 names of God in the Torah, and then somebody said there were 400 names of God, and then I come back to Eyeh, Asher, Eyeh, from the burning bush. So what is the God that we're to love with all our heart and all our soul? It feels like an understanding of that is basic to figuring out if and to what extent we have faith, I think.
Well, you're saying, no, you're exactly saying what I said. It does beg the question, right? God said, right? You say the Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord Adonai is our God. Adonai is one. And you're saying, well, who is Adonai? What is Adonai? Okay, well, yeah, you can do that, but you can also say the Shema without belief in God, because it's been traditionally said by Jews from biblical days till today. And that can be enough for you. My grandparents said it. My great-grandparents said it. I understand, I identify as a Jew in one way by saying Shema. The fact that my great-grandparents thought differently about God than I do, or that I deny God and my parents didn't, I can still say Shema. I can still keep kosher if I have a reason that I want to do it. And it can be as simple as that. I was raised in a kosher home. I'm paying tribute to my parents. Now, I wasn't raised in a kosher home, so I can't pay tribute to my parents that way. I keep kosher for other reasons, but I don't keep kosher because God commanded it, or because I think God would be disappointed in me if I don't, right? That's not my view, right? Even though I believe in God, but I don't view God that way. So I still have to come to grips with why I keep kosher, right? Or why I pray, even though I don't believe that God answers prayers. I don't think that's how it works for me. All right. So let's go on. Let's read a little more. This is from the Talmud. Who would like to do this one? Got a reader? It's in English.
I can read it.
Okay, thanks, Rachel.
I have to set up my eyes just right here. Rav Judah said in the name of Rav, when Moses ascended on high, he found the Holy Blessed One engaged in adding crowns to the letters of the Torah. Said Moses, Lord of the universe, who compels you to do that? God answered, there will arise a man at the end of many generations, Akiva ben Joseph by name, who will spin out of each little heaps and heaps of laws. Lord of the universe, said Moses, permit me to see him. God replied, turn around. Moses went and sat down at the end of the 8th row and listened to the discourses upon the law. Not being able to follow their arguments, he was ill at ease. But when they came to a certain subject, and the disciple said to the master, from where do you know this? And the latter replied, it's a law given to Moses at Sinai. Moses was comforted.
Okay, so Jeff, if you would get us back to seeing each other. So here's the scene, right? They're imagining God writing the Torah, right? And you've all seen Torah scrolls, I hope. And you know there are little flares on the top. They're called crowns, right? Kitarim, these little crowns. And Moses says, what are you doing, God? Why do I need a crown on top of a shin? I can see the letter shin. I don't need a crown up there. And God said, because I know eventually there's this guy, And he's going to interpret these crowns, and they will have meaning then. Now, we understand Akiba lives in the 2nd century, 1st and 2nd century of the Common Era. Moses, ostensibly, lives about the year 1200, 1250 BCE, right? So we're talking about 1500 years, 1400 years. And God says, yeah, this guy's going to show up eventually and make sense out of these crowns. So Moses says to God, I got to see this. How does this work? So God takes Moses and puts him in Akiba's yeshiva. And where does he put him? In the last row. Now, the way the yeshiva was set up, the newest students sit in the last row. The most skilled students sit up front. Okay, so here's Moses sitting in the back of the shul, of the yeshiva, with all the greenhorns who are new to the yeshiva. And he's listening, and he doesn't understand a thing. He doesn't know what they're talking about. Now they're talking about the Torah, and he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand the language. He doesn't understand the vocabulary. He doesn't understand what's going on. And then suddenly, Akiba says, this is Torah from Sinai, right? As given to Moses. And Moses says, now I get it. I'm happy. Because my tradition that you gave me is alive in the future, not just through Akiba, but through this process, which I don't understand. Now, think about that notion of what our tradition is saying. That if we were to go back to Akiba's day, we would understand what Akiba is saying. If Akiba would go back to Moses's day, Akiba would understand what Moses was doing. But Akiba, if he came to our day, would have no idea what we're doing, any more than Moses had when he came to Akiba's day. Our tradition changes so much over time in order to impact our people, and it's all through this process of debate and questioning. And we arrive at places that are totally unforeseen in the story, except by God. And what God's saying is, this will keep going. This is the way of Jewish tradition, right? It is a totally different tradition in Akiba's day than it was in Moses's, and it is in our day than it was in Akiba's day. There are elements that are the same. Shabbat existed in Moses's day and Akiba's day and our day, right? We all have Shabbat. But Shabbat in Moses's day is very different than it was in Akiba's day, and it's very different today. It has certain elements that are the same, but a lot of it has changed. Comments?
Are you saying that our faith has to keep changing?
Well, I'm saying our everything is changing. As I started by saying, there were really no atheists in Akiba's day or Moses's day. We're filled with atheists, aren't we? I would say Beth Shalom is filled with a lot of atheists. There are a lot of people in our congregation that would deny God, or at least agnostics. And that for many people is a simple way of saying, I don't deal with God. I don't want to get involved with God. You know, whether I believe or you don't believe is irrelevant to me. Very few people are pure atheists. It's a very hard position. Intellectually, you have to work really hard at being an atheist, a real atheist, who has gone through the process of denying all possibilities of there being a higher power. But there are plenty of Jews who absolutely have written God off, any form of God. I use this example all the time. Martin Baranek, Mark's father, in his book, opens by saying, Auschwitz, took God from me. And he closes the book with the same thing. I don't believe in God, but he's a devout Jew, a traditional Jew who raised his kids traditionally in a traditional synagogue and in a day school. So, that's very different than the faith of Akiba or of Moses. And Akiba's faith was very different than Moses's. Akiba never, as far as we know, never brought a sacrifice to the temple, ever, because he lived after the destruction of the temple. So Akiba never had the process of going to the temple and sacrificing. And Moses never saw the temple in Jerusalem because he died before we got to Israel, right? So his form was different even than the form once we were in Israel. And the form in Israel changed in the diaspora. And then it changed again when the second temple was destroyed. And then it changed again as we evolved. And the faith changed, what we believed, what we don't believe, and it's still changing. Yes. Any other comments on that?
I would,
Yes, Myrna.
Would you say that the more things change, the more they stay the same? Because the elements from the very beginning are still with us.
Well, yes, and that is the thread. In other words, that's the wheat. The wheat is still in the bread, right? The flax is still in the cloth and the clothes. It hasn't left. It's been transformed. That's why that parable is so helpful, I think, visually, because you haven't lost any of the steps along the way. They've been transformed into another step. So when you take the wheat and you beat it and get it off the stalk, and then you crush it, right? The wheat, the kernels are still there. They've been transformed. And now after you make it into dough, the flour first and then the dough, the flour is still there. The wheat is still there. Everything is still there. It's just been transformed, right? So Shabbat is still here. 10 Commandments are still here. Everything circumcision, kashrut, all that stuff is here, but it's not, the thread is there, but it's been transformed into a different form. And let's take the example of kashrut. I think that's a great one. Do you think that Moses, who said, don't see the kid in its mother's milk, and then gave laws about which meat you could eat, which fish you could eat, which grasshoppers you could eat, right? But didn't say anything about milk and meat together except for that one line 3 times about seething a kid in its mother's milk. Do you think he would have understood kashrut today? Because, separate dishes, they probably didn't even use dishes. They didn't know what that was. And by the time they got to dishes, you think they could afford separate sets of dishes? Think of the worlds they lived in, and what they had available and how things changed over time and what physical things they were working with. They didn't have metals by and large for a while till they got to bronze, and bronze is one thing. And then you move to other metals, and they didn't have them available for everybody. These are very expensive, difficult things to get. So just think about a thing like kashrut and how much it's evolved, how much it's continued to evolve. If you go to a kosher reception today, you can eat shrimp, cheeseburgers.
how?
They make shrimp out of cod. It looks like shrimp. Apparently it tastes like shrimp, right? They make cheeseburgers with non-cheese cheese, non-milk cheese. All I'm saying is, who would have imagined in my grandfather's day that he would eat shrimp and think that it was kosher? we got all kinds of stuff today that they never would have imagined, right? In how we understand kashrut, but that's true for almost every single element, including our faith. I would say that Moses would not understand the concept of afterlife as it exists in Orthodoxy today. And I would certainly say that Moses would not understand Tchiyat HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead, in any form. Nancy.
Thank you so much. Shouldn't agnostics or non-believers be reconstructing Jews who downplay God in Jewish living and practice? Reform Judaism still has God front and center. Why aren't we, most of us, reconstructionists? That's one question.
Okay.
Another one, if I can toss them all out there. I think many people don't want to or feel comfortable with davening because of not having faith in God. When I read the translation, it is not connecting. I'm not connecting with it because of that. So without having faith and reading it from a literal term in the artistic, poetic translation, I think it turns a lot of Jews off who don't have faith. And last but not least, you started with Emunah. So God has faith in us, but one of the things I think is most remarkable is that in Moda Modeh Ani, in the morning, God has faith in each of us when we are thankful for having God return our souls. So how is that also? I don't see that in other religions. That's one of the few things I actually admire about it, is that in theory, God has faith in us.
Okay, 3 questions in 5 minutes, because I got to finish in 5 minutes. I have to do something. So first, faith, if you understand the word emunah the way I described it as loyalty, God is loyal to us and he expects loyalty. Loyalty is not faith as we understand it today. If you want to use emunah as faith, you've transformed what that word was biblically, which is exactly what we do. We make it work for us. As far as translation of text, I don't think that's the reason people, by and large, for me, my understanding in today's world is we're still struggling with Holocaust. We're still struggling with the issue of evil and how God can let all this happen. If we really believe in this notion that God is all powerful, all good, all knowing, it doesn't resonate with our experience in the world, knowing what we know, and what we've experienced in the lifetime of many people still alive, and in our memories that are fairly fresh. I think we will, as we move further away from it, there will be a coming back toward faith. It's throughout the world, faith exists in all kinds of forms. It seems to be a part of the human mind that we move in that direction. And I think atheism among Jews will also, I believe, recede somewhat, but not for quite a while, and not until probably 2 more generations. The children of survivors need to pass, and we need to get over the Holocaust as a reason to be Jewish and anti-Semitism as a reason to be Jewish. We need to get back to the notion that there is richness in our tradition and there is reason to be Jewish in a positive sense. And we have movement in that direction. And I would say Reform is trying, and not only Reform, but all liberal traditions are trying to do that. And that brings me to Reconstruction. Partly it's because we have so few Reconstructionist synagogues and rabbis, and they're spread out all over the place, and they tend to be smaller. And they're harder to, the reality is we have one here down south, and I think we have one somewhere up north in Broward, and, there are a couple of small shuls. But if you want something for your kids and you want a community right now, and I think in the future, you're not finding it in Reconstructionists. I still believe, and I've said it many times in my career, there's only 2 forms of Judaism. There's basically Orthodoxy, and there's not what we might call progressive, liberal, non-Orthodoxy, however you want to label it. And that's everybody on the other side. That's 80% of the Jewish world, maybe more. We're all Jews by choice on that side. And even many who are Orthodox are Jews by choice. We live in a very different world today because we understand choice differently than Moses understood it and Akiva understood it. We understand free will differently than they did. We live in a world where there are choices in everything. Even in the cereal aisle, there are choices beyond belief. No, I mean, we take for granted that every aspect of our life is choice. And we think that that's normal. When we had people from the Soviet Union, Jews, come over and stand in an aisle in Publix, they were frozen. They couldn't make a decision because in the Soviet Union, there were two kinds of cereal, oat and wheat. That was it. That was if they had them. And usually only one was in stock. You think we have shelf problems? I went to Poland, I saw it under the Soviet Union. I was in Russia during the Soviet Union, I saw it. On the shelf was nothing. And then they come here and they've got literally 1,000 cereals to choose from in one aisle. Do you know how abnormal that is in the history of the world? So we believe in choice. It's inculcated in us. It's inculcated in the Western world. Okay, that is who we are today. And so we make decisions. And I believe that we are still stuck in this period right now. As far as Reconstructionists, I hope that we will find a way to take all of our liberal institutions and make some kind of cooperative. And there is some movement going on, partly because of economic reasons. But it should have happened down here a long time ago. Emmanuel shouldn't be standing by itself. Temple Israel shouldn't be standing by itself. Cuban Hebrew shouldn't be standing by itself. We should have become an amalgam of some kind of community a long time ago. But because of egos and many other things and politics, it hasn't happened. But it should, and maybe it will over time. I am an optimist. Anyway, I'm going to have to wrap up for today. Thank you for attending. Next Thursday and the one after that, we're actually going to go into much more of the faith issue. And I wish you a wonderful Omer. We're still in the Omer, counting.
Yes.
And
Yes.
tonight, I believe, is it 25? I think we're on the 25th day of Omer. Nancy, you got your computer to check that? Because I know Lag BaOmer is next Wednesday night, Thursday. So we should be somewhere in the mid-20s. I was counting it for a while. Do you have it? 26, 27. Okay, the 27th.
Today is 27.
Okay, tonight is the 28th or 27th. We count at night.
Yesterday was 26.
Okay, so today is 27. All right, well, we've counted the 27th day of Omer. Mazel tov. See you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
13 to
Thank
go.
you.
My pleasure.
You.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Jeff.